warmer in here than the other building. The City of Southport Board of Aldermen Special Workshop, February 7th, 2023 meeting is now called to order. Welcome to those in attendance and those that are joining us virtually, and thank y'all, especially from the county, and would like to recognize Commissioner Sykes is with us, as well as the county manager and John Nichols from County Utilities. Thank y'all so much for being here with us. We're going to start with the invocation, and then we'll follow that by the Pledge of Allegiance. Let us pray. Father God, we thank you for the blessings that you bestow upon Brunswick County and upon Southport. As it evidences today, we thank you for stopping the rain. We thank you for the rain itself, but we thank you for stopping it and giving us this beautiful day. We ask you today to guide us to make good and right decisions for Southport and for Brunswick County. In your name we pray. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And thank you, Alderman Davis, for the invocation. Could I get a motion to approve today's agenda? No comments. All in favor? Okay, then we're moving on to the agenda, and we'll begin with item 1 and our city manager.
Good morning, everyone. Is that better? Thank you all. This is your first workshop, and I'm so glad that we got together so we can go over the agenda and many other items ahead of time. Obviously, the number 1 agenda is the wastewater treatment plant expansion. You will note as we go through the PowerPoint, I have put a lot of beach scenery so that will keep you calm as we discuss this topic. So with that, Dory, if you can move it along. As was mentioned, we have with us County Commissioner Pat Sykes, County Manager Steve Stone. We have Director of Utilities John Nichols with us. Gary Hartong, the President of Wooten, will be on the screen after I'm done with this. And then Emily Miller, our grant writer, is on her way. I don't know if she made it yet, but she's on her way. So with that, I believe everybody's kind of aware of where we're at with this. We had the opportunity to join with the county in doing an expansion in order to take Southport's waste. And it was estimated that we would come in around probably 37 million with plus 3 million in engineering fees, 7 million in tap fees. The 3 bids came in and were opened, and lo and behold, the low bid was 47.6, ranging all the way up to 57.688, obviously way overbid. And the county did reject the bids, not just based on price. There were other issues that happened, and they are now ready to rebid this project. Our team with Wooten has gone through it, finds that everything was in order. With the request for proposal and the bid documents. They've gone through it, the county people, and feel that everything's pretty much in line. And so they are ready to go to bid. The only thing we did ask is to do an alternate bid on the EQ basin. That's about $1 million. I know the county definitely wants it, but we'd like to see if that might vary, somewhat the pricing. So go ahead, Dory. So right now it looks like we have a gap somewhere of around $27 million. That's what we're kind of guessing right now. So possible sources of funding for that In your regular agenda for Thursday night, there is the $1,263,000. We were requesting from you to switch the ARPA funds over to this project. I mean, it isn't going to fill it, but it's going to help. Every penny is going to help. I've already sent the letter to the Division of Water Quality for an additional $5 million on top of the monies we already have received from them. I'm hearing that is probably not going to happen, that we've maxed out our requests from them. So I doubt it, but I've sent the letter, and we'll see what happens there. 15 million, we will know. Gordon Hargrove did request an additional 15 million from the state in ARPA funding, and we should find out about that. February 21st is supposed to be announced. Supposedly, we'll hear a couple weeks in advance. So anytime now, we should be able to know if we're going to receive that. And then in the list of the capital items I sent to our state representatives was money that we could receive from them as a grant to help us fill the gap there. But the question that the county needs to know from all of you, and hopefully by the end of February, is how much debt are you willing to take on to get this project done? And that's the big question you have to answer. As you can see in your, on the PowerPoint, but also in the narrative I gave you, currently the current rate for in-city is $77 for the first 1,000 gallons. So if you borrow $1 million, this is approximate, you're looking at an additional $1.54 per month per customer. 15 million, it's an additional $23.06 per month per customer. And if you borrowed 29 million, it's $44.58. Those rates are humongous, humongous. So one of the things I've already reached out to is a financial advisor who finally I found when it took me forever. First Tryon Advisors, who have worked mostly with small communities to come up with ways to pay for something like this and come up with some debt scenarios you can go through. So I'm meeting with them Friday, and hopefully they can help us with that. The other thing is I reached out to the local government commission, who was fabulous. They were great. I met with the director of debt management. Also on that call was Donna Davis, who's the utilities guru for them, and they asked great questions. They may have some thoughts of how we can do this. So again, Melanie Trexler is on vacation. She's back on Thursday. So by Friday, I'm hoping that we have some answers and can have like a group meeting. But this is a tough one. There are times I've lost sleep over this because that's a lot of money. And so we have to try to come up with some different scenarios that I can give to you before the end of the month. That's what my plan is. So with that, we have some experts here. So if there's questions, I'll be glad to answer those. Mr. Alt.
So I want to thank John Allen for getting these workshops together like this, because I'm going to be asking questions that normally would drag the other meetings on way too long. So the West System, I guess it's called, has a capacity of 6.5 million gallons per day. Is that correct? So, I mean, that's what was one of these documents that we signed, so I think, assuming that's correct. Whatever the number is, it's almost immaterial for my question, is that with all of the building that's going on, it's been approved by the county, rightfully approved, all the way up to 11, all the way down 17, that's within the confines of what I think to be the West System. How much capacity, extra capacity is there today? How much capacity will be there after the already approved developments are built, and how much capacity is going to be needed in the future for all the things that are lined up in the planning board in Brunswick County? Because I'm confused as to why we're looking at little bitty expanding a sewer plant for little bitty Arlington, Southport, I forget where I am all the time, for Southport, and it would appear, from a novice, that the system's going to have to be expanded just to supply sewage capacity to the county.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to address that. And for awareness, as far as the capacity of the system, we have 6 million gallons per day at the West Brunswick plant, and then about 500,000 gallons per day at the existing Shallotte plant. And so those all are part of the West Brunswick overall system. So, as far as the capacity, when we look at the capacities and expansions, what we're looking at is actual flow. And so we follow some of the state's guidelines on when we have to expand the plant based on those flows into the plant. Also within the general conditions that we have within all of our participant agreements, there's an outline of when we have to do an expansion, and that's based on actual flow. So there is also a permitted capacity, which is typically a lot higher than your, in your transmission system, which is a lot higher than what is permitted at the plant. And the reason for that is that what the state requires is for your collection system and your transmission system, that you build that for the permitted capacity in the system. As far as at the plant, we base that on actual flow. If we didn't, we would be building capacity that we wouldn't need for maybe 20 or 30 years. And so there's a difference there. And when you're looking at all of the items that or subdivisions that are permitted within Brunswick County, if we were to go ahead and construct our plant for that, we wouldn't be using that capacity for many, many years, because it takes a significant period of time to actually have that need at the plant facility. With that being said, we've just completed a master plan, and certainly with all the growth, we're concerned about ensuring that we have enough capacity. We're growing at a tremendous rate. And so one of the things that we have within our CIP is a number of expansions at a number of our facilities. And so we're planning ahead for the capacity that we'll need, but you just have to keep in mind that there is a lag between what you have to construct in the transmission and collection system versus what you have to construct at the plant facilities.
Okay. So one of the issues, this issue is not just one little thing to look at. We have, the best estimate we have so far is just in the 1/4 of the city that we looked at our sewer system, 59 million gallons of rainwater that we send to the West Station to process for us because of the I&I in our system. As we begin to fix that system, whenever we start to fix that, that number will hopefully go down. And thus, the number that we're basing the 750,000 gallons on per day is current usage. But as we go down, I'm not smart enough to figure out how much we actually really do need in the future if we can eliminate the 59 million gallons. And
Right.
so when we are asked how much are we willing to go into debt, there's too many moving pieces for me to try to figure that out without, sitting around a table where it's a real work session and trying to nail that down. If we can eliminate X number of gallons of rainwater per year, and that brings our number down, and we look at how much we're going to go up in building on the other side, there's some other equation than we are currently using, and I don't know what that equation is. And so I think we need to collectively, because you guys are much more knowledgeable on the sewer plant capacity issues than we are. And we need to sit down with our engineers and your engineers to try to figure that out before we can make a decision how much are we going to go into debt. And the last question I have actually is probably not for you, but I'm asking this question basically for the camera because I've been asked this question a lot and I don't have an answer. If you live in Southport, you pay a county tax and you pay a city tax. And my question was, if I was to take my house and move it into the county and it was valued at the same amount, just for hypothetically, would my county tax go up than what it currently is? Because if we're paying county tax, if I lived in the county and we're building all this stuff, the individual taxpayer is not being taxed at the same rate that we're being taxed to build sewage capacity. Does that make sense, what I'm trying to say? So I'm just trying to figure out what do we get for our county tax? And that's not your question, though. I'm not trying to put you on the spot for that.
Maybe I should answer that one.
Yes.
If, understand all property in the county, the value of your house, if you moved it somewhere else, the value of your house might change, or it might not, but let's say it stayed the same. Your county tax would be exactly the same. A $400,000 house, no matter whether it's in unincorporated county or in any of our 19 municipalities, the county tax is exactly the same. Only the municipal tax might change if it moved into another town, or there would only be the county tax if you were in an unincorporated area. But the rest of your question, the county taxes, and for that matter, your city taxes, don't have anything to do with the utilities. Our utilities are run through an enterprise fund that all the cost and all the revenues are accounted for our utilities in a separate fund. And as a general rule, money does not move back and forth between the funds. By the way, Aaron Smith, our Chief Financial Officer, also came with us today, and he could really give you a drill about how these different funds work. But the money, the revenues for water and sewer are in a fund, and for at least a couple of decades now, money has not moved between the two funds at the county level, and we certainly don't plan to be putting general fund dollars, i.e. your tax revenues and sales tax and all the other general fund dollars. So that being said, the water and sewer enterprises, and yours here in Southport are really set up the same way. Those expenses and the revenues are in that separate fund. So ultimately, it's your water and sewer customers like me. My house is a block from here, and those dollars are what pay your operating cost in your local collection and distribution systems and any capital cost. To date, Southport has not contributed capital cost to our regional wastewater system. You've only been a customer essentially leasing capacity in the system. And all the other municipal partners in the system have already paid very significant capital cost. You've in essence been using resources that the county paid the capital cost on as we developed the system. And that's why when we look to address Southport's wastewater needs, we entered into the agreement several years ago that would include you paying the anticipated capital cost for you to Southport to become a full-fledged partner in the system. And we're at the point that that leased capacity really isn't available anymore. And unfortunately, when we opened the bids a few months ago, they were dramatically higher than the engineer's opinion of cost. In talking with the state, we're not the only one. Other similar projects statewide saw very, very significant increases in the fall.
So our current lease is for 750,000 gallons per day, I believe. And we're asking for another 750,000 gallons per day, are we not?
No, you're talking about the same quantity. It's just because the county had excess capacity. So we were willing to essentially let you lease it. But now that we're at the point that that's not going to continue to be available. And that's why we agreed several years ago that we would go ahead and move through this process really for Southport to become a full-fledged partner in the regional system.
Thank you for that explanation so that people can go back and look at this and get that from you. Appreciate that.
Would you like me to try to address the question regarding the amount of capacity? and peak
If you could, I'd love it.
So one thing to keep in mind is that we have to design our facilities for peak flows. On an average day, we have to have our facilities work every day of the year. And so when you're looking at the amount of treatment capacity that you have, you're looking at your peak capacities. That's what our permits are based on, at the wastewater plants are peak capacities. So Southport has, gone over in peak time periods, well over their 750,000 gallons of leased capacity. And so certainly we encourage removing I&I. That would be a big help. And I think your staff has done a good job in identifying, areas that I&I is entering into the system and have begun reducing, that I&I. But what I have seen with reduction in I&I, it can help, but it will oftentimes not make a tremendous, change in the overall peak capacities. When several years ago, when we were talking about the amount of flow that Southport needed, we were talking about either a 750,000 gallon expansion or a 1 million gallon per day expansion. And with the growth that, we were seeing, and being the utilities director that has to ultimately, manage these facilities, I want you to have, more capacity. And so I think that was one of the reasons we were looking at that, looking at the growth in the system. But ultimately, and this has been quite a number of years ago that decision was made. It was ultimately decided by the city that they would prefer, and I think cost had a lot to do with it back then, to pursue 750,000 gallons per day. So I think even with your I&I reduction, already coupled with the growth that you've had since that decision was made, I don't think it's likely that anything less than 750,000 gallons per day would make a lot of sense at this point.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question for our city manager. On page 24 in our packet, it lists review findings and questions, and I guess my question is, it looks like Wooten did this for us.
Correct.
And were these things that affected the cost of the bid?
They said that some of it might have, but it was also just suggestions. Wooten did feel that the bid specs they put together was very well done. and they didn't see, but there's a couple of things. We shared that with the county.
John, did you have any question about any of that? You had access to all of these questions? I guess the reason I'm saying is because some of it sounded like, you know, we were maybe redoing the .5 portion of it as part of the new part.
Right, and yes, I did get a chance to review those, and there are reasons for that. I can't remember the exact questions off the top of my head, but I believe one of them had to do with the infiltration basin. You know, was it for the existing 500,000 gallons per day existing facility, or was it completely for the new facility? So infiltration basins are a much less expensive way to get rid of your effluent. And so, but they're very dependent on the soils. The best soils for using an infiltration basin, which would be less expensive than spray fields, were in an area where we had existing spray fields. And so in order to utilize that site, we had to remove some of those spray fields that were required for the existing facility. And so what we're doing is placing the infiltration basin where the soils are good enough for that to work. And then we have to rebuild some of that capacity for the existing facility that we were taking away. And the engineers look at that and determine that was the most cost-effective route to provide effluent disposal. I think another question came up with regard to a septage receiving station. And so at the existing facility, we have a septage receiving station. I think there's a bit of a misconception that the revenues that we receive from that go just to the county. While the county collects those revenues, we put that into the regional budget. And so that septage receiving station reduces the overall cost for all of the participants. And so that's not just county revenue. That's revenue for all the participants, and we show that on our quarterly report, every 3 months. What we see the need for in the regional system is to have some capabilities at the Charlotte plant, which would be available for all of the participants to utilize, and any revenues from those would go to the regional system to the benefit of all of the participants in the system. The other key point is when you're basically buying into the regional system, not just a single facility. And so our agreements with other participants require us to provide some beneficial or a determination of the value of the existing facilities that Southport may utilize. And so there are some existing facilities that Southport may not be paying for directly. For example, the land cost. We're not charging Southport for the land cost. There is, in those existing septage receiving stations, Southport has value in that. And so what we're trying to do is provide a reasonable offset, to things that Southport was not paying for versus, things that made sense to do as part of this project. And so the septage receiving station was one of those things. And anytime that you're adding a new customer, the facility should be of equivalent quality. And so for instance, Southport's wastewater flow will be treated at the West Brunswick plant just due to proximity. There's an equalization basin at the West Brunswick plant. And so the flow from Southport will be going through an equalization basin. While, I can understand why we want to reduce cost, not having an equalization basin at the Mulberry Branch plant would not be an equivalent, type of facility. And so those are things that we have to take into account with our agreements with our other participants. And feel free to remind me if there were any other items that were on there that I need to address. I'd be happy to do so. Okay. So,
Got you there. I don't know if it was a year ago or so when we met at the county at that meeting, and we discussed an analysis to understand what we need to do in order to have the county really assume our system. Do you know where we are in that process?
you know,
Are you talking about merger
The grant that we were getting to do the
merger feasibility?
Yes.
Yes. Actually, we have Wooten on, the president of Wooten is in back of you on the screen. Yeah, they're working. I've told Walter Gross, who's kind of the project manager for this, we need to speed this up and get this. I think they just got all the information they needed from the county. In fact, I think the last piece went over this morning, over to them. So we should have the results of that very soon. But I don't know if, can he hear us?
Can you hear us okay? Can you hear us, sir?
Speaking to Mr. Gross, that was the last I knew that I said, look, we need to have that yesterday, so we should have that fairly soon.
I think that would help us determine more of our conversation to know, what setting expectations and how for our citizens and that sort of thing.
So on the document here, there's a thing that says that upon signing this document back in 2020, all the agreements that we had with the county between 2008 and 2018, that decade, are null and void I think 30 days after we signed this. And then on the next page, there's some more writing about Southport having the sole right to provide wastewater. We in a separate discussion with a developer, we have stated that we believe that we have first right to be the person, like the group that provides wastewater to that development. But it's in the ETJ. So my question is, does this removal, which is already signed and done, does it have impact on that discussion, or does the next page recodify that we actually have that right? And so I'm trying to figure out whether or not there's a problem there.
That'd be illegal.
I mean, Board Member Alt had asked me this yesterday. I said, I have no idea. I think you'd really have to wait till we get a city attorney to look over these documents, unless anyone from the county wants to address it. But you're looking at a number of agreements here over the years, and a lot of them are null and void, and it's like, wow, I don't know legally. You'd have to go right from the start and go all the way through them to figure that out.
I just tossed that out, that it's likely we'll have additional conversations, just trying to figure out what we signed in 2020.
Are you speaking of?
I'll give it to you, sir.
Well, but are you talking about area in the ETJ?
That's on the west side of Howe Street, in the ETJ.
If really either of us can serve somebody in the ETJ,
we had a document that we interpreted saying that we had first right to do that, and if we couldn't do it for some reason, or we just agreed to it, then the county would do it. But we would have the right to invoke that we had first due. Correct. And so, I think, but I'm not sure, it's one of these that just went null and void after, in 2020. But then I look on the next page, and it says, whatever agreements you had up until the day of signing, which was that agreement, are still good, if I'm interpreting this correctly. So there's an issue out there that's rolling around that I'm not sure we're going to resolve today, but I just bring it up that we need to resolve it relatively quickly.
I might be able to, I don't know if I can fully address the question without looking at the agreements, but I guess it really comes down to who has the right to serve.
Correct.
I would say our stance has been we have no objection to the city of Southport serving that area. At least my understanding as utilities director is that when the last agreement was nullified, that nullified any service areas that may have existed by agreement in any of the other agreements. And so there were agreements that had a service area indicated. And so when, I shouldn't say the most recent, but the agreement beforehand was nullified, that nullified those service areas. And so that is my understanding at this point. But let me just reiterate, Brunswick County has no objection to the city serving those areas. However, what we have done in other areas, if it's within the city limits, then we would defer to whatever municipality, and we would not serve in city limits unless we got some letter from that city or town indicating that they wanted us to serve. If it's in the ETJ, then if the developer wanted us to serve, then we would serve in the ETJ.
You would even though you would be crossing the lines, because you say, I think it's a 2018 document. The 2018 document said that we would not cross our lines to get to Europe to do sewage service outside of our area, and you would not cross our lines unless it was in a mutual agreement to do that.
Yeah, I would have to look at that.
John, that was part of what was voided. The intent of the 2020 agreement was to say that you no longer refer to the intent of the 2020 agreement was to say just what they do, that the prior agreements were null and void. And some I don't remember, there were several. The earlier agreements had established some out of corporate limits service areas for Southport. The 2020 agreement removed those. So then essentially we reverted to the policy that is our general policy that John just stated. We do not serve customers within corporate limits unless the municipality, in essence, defers to us and says, yes, please serve this. If it's in the ETJ, then really it can be either, and if a developer asks us to provide service within an ETJ, we do, and that's without regard to whether the municipality has lines that could serve it or not.
That is really concerning.
That's why
That's
I'm
really
bringing it up.
concerning.
So
And I wouldn't have any, I mean,
I really think this is a legal conversation to understand with this. So that's what I would throw out there. I mean, we can all talk about it, but we don't have an attorney here to tell us about the contracts. We've got the experts from the county. I'm not discounting that, but I'm just saying if we're going to debate something over a legal So I hear you.
For the purposes of the public, the reason we are focusing on this particular question right now, we have an extremely large development proposal that previously was withdrawn, but we are anticipating it coming back pretty quickly. And the issue of whether the developer would annex into the city or not is a paramount consideration. And concurrent with that is whether we would be the ones supplying sewer services or not. And so it will be very helpful to know what we can require of the developer and what we can't.
Hey, I'm going to just give you this.
Well, that's okay. We've got copies of it at the office. Well, and again, certainly we aren't attorneys, but I believe there have been statutory changes that, you know, the county has nothing to do with that impact your ability to compel annexation through utilities.
Yeah, we're not suggesting that. I would say it'd be hard for me to have any relationship with the county if that's the case.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions, certainly with our county partners here? Does anybody have any more questions for them?
I believe we do have the president of Wooten on now, if you want to go back to your question. That would be on merger feasibility study and where Wooten is with that.
So, do you mind repeating the question?
We're just wondering about the timeline for the completion of the feasibility study. Merger feasibility study.
Okay, the merger regionalization study.
Yes, sir.
That work has begun. I don't have an exact update for you, but I can get that information from our project engineer who's working on that and provide you a written update or a quick update here shortly.
Sir. Or the county, John?
I want to say it seems to me that one of the issues that we're facing is poor timing. I mean, we're trying to bid this thing right now at a time of the highest prices that we've seen for this work in ever, a generation or whatever. So I guess my question is there any way that we could, is there any possibility or any advantage to, and nobody can answer that question, to trying to hold off on doing this thing for a year or two and see if the market restabilizes and prices come down? I mean, is that even an option?
It's not a viable option because, as we said earlier, we're to the point that we really don't have the excess capacity to provide for Southport on a continuing basis, and the facility expansion would take quite a bit of time to construct, even after we entered into contract. And you know, this issue has been sort of kicked down the road for at least a decade and a half, and it is unfortunate of the timing. Our consultants don't believe any time in the short-term future, say the next year or two, that there's going to be any significant decline. There is so much construction going on and so many $1 billion of federal funds that are moving out into infrastructure projects that by and large, the industries that build this equipment and that construct these plants really have the amount of work that they can handle. So they bump their prices up to make sure they get a strong return.
My answer, Bonnie, to your initial question of how much do you want to borrow is as little as possible, clearly. I guess I'm really hoping we get some good news in the next few days from the other grant that we were talking about. If we don't, we got a real problem. We're
It's
gonna have
really
to
my
solve it.
plan to come back to you again. I mean, it'll probably be a special meeting. We'll just deal with this one thing with the results from the financial advisor, local government commission. And by then, we should know where we are, hopefully, with the 15 million, so. Or if anyone wins Powerball. Somebody won last night?
Mr. Hartong said, "I don't see advantage in waiting 1 or 2 years. Prices will continue to climb with all federal and state construction funds in the pipeline."
And Steve, y'all, and John too, what I think I remember you teaching me, John, is that at 80% of a need, you have to start, and then at 90%, you need to be building it, basically. Is it something it's by state statute?
Yeah, it's referred to as the 80-90 rule. And so, yes, fortunately, we've already designed it. And so we've made that progress, but we need to move forward to ensure we have enough capacity before we run out. There is something in the standard provisions of the contract that we've added in there that's not a state requirement, but we also have some things that we start a preliminary planning at the 70% stage, just to ensure that we're ready, and don't hit those 80 and 90% thresholds. And that would be for any future expansions to the West Brunswick system as well.
So today is informational?
Correct.
And that we're not making a decision today on anything. Does anybody have any more questions? The county, do y'all have anything else you want to share with us? We certainly appreciate y'all being here.
No, and I'll tell you, Steve and his crew have been great about making sure that we're at the table, because I think for a while that wasn't happening. And we need to be there at the table, so we thank you for your assistance with that.
And John, every time I've ever asked you for anything, you've been, the next day I get it, so thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate it.
You have to spend all your time on Southport.
No. We work with many, so.
Yeah. 5-minute, excuse me, let's take a 5-minute break just to transition to the next item, if we could, and allow Bonnie to have a conversation. Well, wait for her, I tell you what, wait for Bonnie to come back, and we'll come back in and do that. Thank you. Okay, we're back. And Emily Miller, who is our grant specialist for the sewer project, wanted to also, she's here, so if we can just finish up with her with the grant, I mean, the sewer conversation. She had some information.
Speak. Sit on. So as most of you know, I've been working on this project since, I think, 2016. Karen's been on it with me almost the whole time, so was Tom. And there's been so many things that have happened, it's hard to keep up with for me. So I'm sure it's a lot of information for everyone else to digest, just because of so many things that have happened over the years. But what I wanted to point out is that the project that we figured in, the rate committee figured in was the $29 million project, which was what our cost estimate was. That $29 million cost estimate included the $7.2 million fee to the county. That's not a construction cost, that's just a fee. So truly, that $29 million construction budget was a $22 million construction budget. Plus you've got the $7 million tap fee. What also was included in that was the city's match, which was a $3 million contribution to the project outside of the loan. So when we talk about the low bid being $47 million as bid this last round, correct. It doesn't include the $7 million, and it doesn't include the $3 million. So right now, if my memory serves me right, Karen can confirm this, we're at about $77 a month for sewer.
For 1,000 gallons base rate. It includes the first 1,000 as our base rate.
Right, and the average user's probably using 3,500.
3,000 is usually how we
Right.
estimate that.
So a little bit more than that already. So when you're talking about if we would have had a $29 million project, we figured in and have been figuring in since that budget was created several years ago, a rate increase that would go up to another $44 a month to cover that $29 million. So what has already been figured in, what we've been planning for, what y'all have been planning for, I say we because I feel like this is my baby, this project. But what we've been planning for is to increase the rates gradually another $44 a month to cover that $29 million, which $3 million of it the city's putting in anyway. So to cover $26 million, $44 a month. So that's that's to borrow technically $26 million. Does that make sense? Okay. Project low bill was $47 million. That does not include that $7.2 million, nor does it include the city's $3 million contribution. So rough numbers, if that number stands, or somewhere ballpark, that number stands as low bid, you're looking more like a $57 million project. That's about double what it's going to cost you in debt service. So without doing an actual calculation right now, I mean, a little over 80, going to be over $80 a month more on top of the 77 base rate and whatever the charge is per thousand up to 3,000 gallons. To your neighbors? I work all over North Carolina, and I've been working all over North Carolina doing financing specifically water and sewer projects since 2006. Never seen a rate that high in a town this size.
Right.
I would say in comparison, we have not done that, but in comparison, I would say you're very high. And I can certainly try to see if I can get some numbers.
And there's other things that factor in. I mean, some folks have low rates, like, for example, I've worked for Wilkes County for probably 15 years now. Wilkesboro has very low rates because they have Tyson Foods that employs 3,500 people and uses, so much water that what they charge them allows them to reduce their residential user rates. There's a lot of things that play into lower rates in other municipalities, but with the number of customers here, which I think is roughly 2,700
Change.
ballpark.
Yeah, 27 and change.
2,700 customers, you got to think about every dollar you borrow, you're literally dividing that by 2,700. And that's just for the debt service. And then, making sure you've got your operation and maintenance costs and all of those things figured in as well. Because even though the O&M for the plant is going to be spread across all the users in the county, you still have your O&M on your system until, if and when the county wants to take that over.
I'm not sure this question is for you, but I'm going to throw it out there. Assuming we can get over the hurdle of who supplies sewage to whom, if at a mere 500 homes in any one development is $9 million in, is it impact fees? What's that term? System development fees, which as they come in, I'm assuming we could use to pay off any debt that we had.
Correct.
So, what I cannot find a right answer to is, take Indigo out for a minute. How many other lots are there in Southport or in the ETJ without changing their zoning that people have the right to build on for X, whether it's R10 or whatever it is? And then if we looked at system development fees for that, the rate that we're building, how do we use that in our decision-making of how much money we can borrow and how we can pay it off? Or do we tell everybody from now on, you got $1,000 a year for your first 1,000 gallons of water? Because that's just the way we set it up.
I don't think that Emily can answer that, but I could certainly put that scenario with our financial advisor. Meanwhile, I can find out how many lots we're talking about.
And
It's
so
kinda like
that
if you
goes
do
towards
a-
everything. I mean, I've asked about electricity. How do we decide how big a substation needs to be if we don't know how big Southport's going to be?
Because you're talking about a complete build-out.
I'm talking about, so we know what our max capacity is
Yeah,
going to be.
that's a complete
So we need to have
build-out.
those
Okay.
idea. Now, granted, that max build-out is not going to take place for a number of years, but can we kind of guesstimate what our cash flow would be as we build out, and what does that
So
mean?
like potential future revenues.
Correct, because right now, we're looking at, okay, we're broke, and we can't pay this. So, I don't know, we don't stop flushing our toilets. I'm not sure what our answer is right now, but the answer that we have right this today is kind of bleak, and I'm trying to figure out the other cash flows.
Get you some numbers.
Karen, yeah, exactly. So, Karen, you probably know the answer to this since you're on the rate committee. Do we charge vacant lots right now?
No, we do not charge
Okay,
vacant
Oak Island
lots.
does. Just
Yeah.
a thought. And then my other question is, like, what do we do? We have no alternative. Or we do? We don't.
I have said those exact words to the county manager. I said, we got to have it. It's a health issue. It's a huge health issue. And he said, well, there might still be a way that the county could assist, but no matter what, we're going to have to pay that money back. Even if they're going to say, help us or finance or something. But if we ever got to that point, I'm going to sit with Steve and see what that means. But we've got to do something. We got to have a system.
Is there a date that they're just going to shut us off?
No, I have not
They
heard
can't
that.
legally,
I
I don't
will
think
tell you,
legally you can do that, can they?
I think that
can't
they
legally do that.
have been very, very, Steve has called me all the time. He says, look, we will not abandon you. So I have not gotten that feeling whatsoever, so.
But on the days that we max out on our capacity, is there a fee that's going to go that they're going to charge us per 1,000 gallon, whatever the figure mathematical figure would be, that we're going to have to pay extra money because on the 4th of July week, we just had too much fluent going to
You mean
supply?
based on the way the situation is now?
Yes.
We're paying- Tom, what's your average daily flow?
It's around 340, I think 340.
Average daily flow is around 340. So you're not even peaking anywhere close to 750,000 gallons a day.
Well, I thought during the summertime that we had peak days, that we were getting close to that, were we not?
The only
A
time
few.
we get really crazy is during hurricane events, high rain events. That's the only time we even get close to 750,000 gallons.
And that will come down significantly as we continue working on the sewer rehab. You know, we've done House Street with the Golden Leaf funding, with the USDA funding. We're doing the rest of the west side of town right now. So
Yeah, but
a
that-
lot of
that-
those issues with
The
storm
first
events.
shovel for the part that we've already done is not going in the dirt, if I read the documents correctly, into 2024.
Pardon me?
The first shovel to fix the pipes in this part of town that we've already done all the study for and collected money for, have an engineer for, they're not going to start digging a hole in the ground to replace a single pipe until 2024.
Correct. And then we have another application in to rehab literally the entire rest of the sewer system. So as you move forward and reduce, and we started with House Street because that had that was going to be the most significant impact on reducing I&I. So as the I&I continues to go down, that with your average daily flows being under 400 already, have you gone over 750? When was the last time you went over 750?
Only during heavy hurricane events.
So outside of a hurricane, that 750 has not been reached before.
Thank you.
And that's really the reason we decided with the 750 instead of the 1 million. That was the recommendation from the engineer because of that. It's really I&I that
That's
is
correct.
pushing.
Multiple engineering firms have looked at this over the years, and they all recommended 750. Hazen and Sawyer recommended that. We have the Freeze and Nichols review a study. They also confirmed that 750 would be plenty of flow. So I think that's a good cushion number. You know, in addition to that, you've got to remember the county's got to look at what they have on paper, right? They're allocating you 750. They know they're going to be taking on average less than 400. That's on paper. They got to look at it as they're going to take 750 every day. Same thing with other users. So a couple of years ago when we were looking at this, I think Oak Island had 3 million gallons a day of capacity. They're using like 1.5 million. Is Oak Island really going to go up to 3 million gallons of capacity? Because at one point I had even suggested this was just an off-the-wall thing, trying to come up with solutions years ago. I was like, can't we get some from some of Oak Island's capacity? You know, they're not using it, and they're locked into this long-term contract. So when the word moratorium is used, it's talking about how much is allocated on paper, not literally what's coming into the plant. Does that make sense? So just something else to think about. Yep. I wish I could get y'all 60 million in grant. I will. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks for your help. Okay, everybody's through with sewer. Moving on to the okay, for now, right. There will be a meeting, just so everybody knows, there will be a meeting at the end of the month where we also revisit all the whole sewer conversation, so. Thank you, Travis.
Absolutely. Can't think of any better topic to follow that up than rights of way. First off, shout out to Dory for helping me with the PowerPoint. I appreciate that. Let's see. Oh, and now it. Honestly, the PowerPoint's not that different from what you have in front of you. So, essentially, talking about rights of way, we know here in Southport that right of way encroachments are prevalent throughout the city, really especially in the core. And as I've been here over the past 3 and some change months, as Bonnie's been here, it's been very clear to us that enforcement of right of way encroachments is inconsistent at best. non-existent at worst, and has led to, there's a lot of confusion among staff, there's a lot of confusion in the public as to what is and is not allowed within rights-of-way. So what we have here in front of you is a draft recommended approach that tries to balance the needs of the city while also taking into account what has previously been allowed to occur within rights-of-way in the past. This is just really at the idea stage right now. With direction from the board, we would go back and actually start drafting the language. There's a number of different places within the UDO and the Code of Ordinances where spot changes would need to occur to execute this idea or any different idea as well. Dory, thank you. Just some additional context, you know, a lot of these issues with encroachments are within the core. It's important to remember that within non-conforming residential lots zoned R10, which is most of the kind of the old grid, there's a lot of carve-outs that are given to residential development, including, there's a lot of exceptions or carve-outs. The first thing is your traditional R10 setbacks are reduced down to, in some cases, no more than 4 feet, which pretty much makes it impossible to put a driveway in if you're going to build a garage in the back of the house. And they're also exempt from residential parking requirements anyway, if they're a non-conforming lot within R10. So a traditional single-family structure in the R10 zoning district is required to provide a certain amount of parking. If your lot is zoned R10, but it's non-conforming, meaning that it's smaller than 10,000 square feet, you're exempted from those parking requirements to be provided on your property.
But that, so to be able to park at my house, normally I'd be parking in the right-of-way at that point.
Correct.
And I don't get exclusive rights to that just because my house is on a non-conforming lot. Is that correct?
Correct, but it's unclear in practice. And there's nothing to say that if you were building in a non-conforming R10 lot, you could provide parking on your site if you want to. The city just can't require you to do it by ordinance. If that,
Yes.
Okay.
We'll circle back to this,
Yes.
I'm sure.
Because of that, and because a lot of these non-conforming lots are pretty small, you see a lot of folks maximizing the building footprint on these non-conforming lots. They're forcing, the only parking that they're ever going to be able to provide is in the right-of-way. There's nothing necessarily wrong or illegal about that. That's the way Southport has developed for centuries, and that's a good way to help preserve that character. I mean, y'all know better than anyone that we have the Historic Preservation Commission, and they're getting underway, and that's sort of the stuff that they're looking at too. But we're going to need to find a way to balance it. Dory, thank you. So ordinance language today. This section right here is the section that is consistent across both the UDO and the Code of Ordinances. It shall be unlawful for any person to place or cause to be placed on any public street, road, alley, sidewalk, or other public right-of-way within the city, any wall, fence, gate, brick, stone, wood, rock, vegetation, or other structure, material or substance above the horizontal plane of the existing ground. So what does horizontal plane mean? It's not defined in the UDO. It's not defined in the Code of Ordinances, at least as far as I can tell. Does that mean that if I dig into the ground, I can put pavers there? As long as the height of the paver doesn't extend above the existing height of the ground? I don't know. The ordinance isn't clear. Sorry, laptop fell asleep. Another point, oh, can you go back? I'm sorry. Another point with this, just to be clear for everyone, really, if we're talking about a public right-of-way that's also a DOT roadway, this conversation is very different because there's an existing encroachment permit process that has to occur within those rights-of-way. This also, of course, doesn't apply to private rights-of-way, so any HOA-maintained street or any otherwise privately owned street. There is additional language in Section 16.8 of the Code of Ordinances, though, one of which says that it should be unlawful for any person to take any action whatsoever within any public right-of-way which creates a hazardous condition or safety hazard, or which otherwise interferes with or obstructs in any manner the passage of persons or vehicles upon or within said public rights-of-way, or which obstruction interferes with or hinders lawful parking within any public right-of-way. First thing I'll say is that these sections that talk about rights-of-way are mouthfuls, and so there's a whole lot here. There's also then a section about enforcement. I'm going to get to enforcement a little bit later, but it directs the code enforcement officer, if they determine that there exists any encroachment, obstacle, vegetation, so on and so forth, within a public right-of-way or sidewalk in violation of the previous sections we've talked about, or which interferes with free passage of persons or vehicles within a right-of-way or a sidewalk, that they shall attempt to identify the persons responsible and take enforcement action upon them. The city tried that a few years ago, and city staff were told to stand down after they had done an inventory of, they started with the 1980 historic district, and there is a huge spreadsheet. Kate has showed it to me and been gracious enough to provide it, and Thomas provided me some background too. They did a lot of work, and then were told to stand down and not take it forward.
Do you know the date of that?
I believe it was 2020. It might have been before COVID, though. I don't recall off the top of my head. So,
Where would that instruction have come from?
my understanding is that it came from city management at the time. Wasn't here. I don't know. Dory, the next slides are just some examples of, encroachments. This was me spending 20 minutes driving around town just finding things. Most of the encroachments I noticed were vegetation that gets very close to the edge of the pavement. It's not the only encroachments like this one, which I know folks are quite aware of. But yes, so the board has some options here. This is one recommendation. The board could also certainly give us direction to just enforce the existing ordinance as it's written. That's a pretty strict ordinance the way it's currently written.
I do need you. This 10-foot clearing zone,
Yes.
on average, what is the right-of-way in this part of town? Is it 15 feet or 20 feet into the property? What is it normally?
The right-of-way itself is, in most places, 99 feet wide.
From the middle of the road, 99 feet right.
99 total, 45 or 44 and a half on each side.
45 on each side of the street.
And the pavement's what, probably 20?
The pavement probably averages
15.
20, 15 in some places, but the other caveat to this, and this is where we really get into the nuance, the pavement isn't necessarily in the center of the right-of-way.
I understand that, yeah.
Right.
So 10 feet would allow parking for the average car, not an 18-wheeler, to be able to park on the right-of-way, and people could put their vegetation from the 10-foot park point in towards the house?
Well, the way we kind of have it set up right now is that the 10 feet clear zone really should be a clear zone.
Right.
Parking as well should actually be outside of that clear zone. So that way, particularly getting to where we have pavement that's less than 20 feet wide, that way if there's a fire truck barreling down the street and there's a car coming the other way, there's enough room for that fire truck to get around it. And that there's not things built up above the ground that would prohibit that fire. I mean, of course, the fire truck's going to get where it needs to go regardless. So if it's plants, well, the plants are going to lose that battle. But if there's more hardened structures.
I'm trying to hook this up to when we have the commercial area built out more and we don't have enough parking spaces in this town, even for one particular building, then how those people going to that are going to park on the right-of-way. Could interfere with my,
I take it.
so if we have the 10-foot, and you're saying in some spots that may not be enough for first responders to get down the road with a hook and ladder or whatever they're bringing in, how are we going to mix those two things together?
Well, there's going to be nuance to it. There's going to have to be. Not every right-of-way is 99 feet wide. There's certainly carve-outs for, the city taking on projects to provide organized public parking. But that's one of the pieces of feedback that we're going to need from the board as well. Maybe 10 feet's too wide, maybe it's 5 feet, to provide more of a buffer on the sides of right-of-way for parking.
There's one more issue in that the trees that the forestry committee plants, in addition to being in the parks, are in the right-of-way.
But that's covered in this recommendation.
Well, but that does get in the way of the fire truck barrel.
It does.
Well, hopefully they're far enough back. So what I would say is, I live in this in-town grid area,
Yeah.
historic district, whatever we want to call it, and I measured Atlantic in front of my house. That asphalt is 18 feet wide. I measured my car. I have a small little Toyota SUV, so not very long. There's approximately 24 feet of unimproved right-of-way in front of my house on the other side of the sidewalk. And I allow for about 2 feet off of the sidewalk for my car bumper. And then I have 8 feet behind it. Now, if I had a truck, like Alderman Carroll, there would not be, 8 feet behind me. And so I applaud staff. First of all, I want to say thank you. I am so grateful. We've been talking about right-of-way since I've been here. So, but from a safety standpoint, these right-of-ways were created back in 1792 really to allow the breeze and for the purpose of the betterment of the community at large and not the benefit of the individual. And so as we look at these right-of-ways and enforcement and stuff, just like with the Historic Preservation Commission, we as a community have got to come together and decide it's of value to us to preserve, I'll start crying, it's a value to us to preserve those things that make Southport Southport. And so, we all have our own opinions and we all want what we want, but as a community, and that it's not for me to say, but as a community, we're going to have to decide, is this a priority to look? Because 50 years from now, if we start drip by drip, the stone is worn away. And so if we let all of this drift, and I appreciate, I can spend a bunch of money on landscape plants and make something look awesome, right? But is that what it's supposed to look like in the right-of-way in front of my house? And is that what it's supposed to accommodate? So I applaud you for doing this. I think safety-wise, our homes are adjacent to businesses, like Alderman Alt said. Parks and recreation facilities and activities are all around us, all around where we live. Churches parking, talking about the safety of the fire and police and all of that. There's also runners and walkers that are doing it for exercise are on the street because today our sidewalks, our network is inconsistent, so they can't really exercise that way. And if we don't have, that's what happens with these fences that bump out and take the right of way, then you can't jump out of the way even. And so anyway, I just think this is a huge safety. I applaud your conversation and all this, and I look forward to us like enforcing it and you telling us what you need.
Travis, when you figured that 10-foot, did you figure the cars parking parallel?
I actually figured the cars parking perpendicular outside of the 10 feet. And the 10 feet came from, we had a conversation, Chief Coring, Chief Drew, we had a bunch of people, not to put Tom under any sort of bus or anything, he was there too though. The 10 feet was a nice round number that seemed reasonable. It may not work in every case, and we may need to think about the same way that we do the setback exemptions, where it's a percentage. How non-conforming is it gives you how much you can reduce the setbacks. Maybe it's the same sort of thing depending upon how wide the right-of-way is.
How would you handle, suppose there's a very narrow road, which we have quite a few of them. If you want to expand that, what would happen to your right-of-way now? So if you have 10 foot and you want to expand to 2 foot on each side, you'd have only 8 now. Is there going to be a provision to expand that, or because already there might be plantings there?
I don't know that the right-of-way would expand. We could extend the pavement within the right-of-way, and in a
Then
lot
the
of
right-of-way
places-
would be smaller.
Yes, the edge, the area of the right-of-way between the edge of the pavement and the edge of the right-of-way, yes, that would
Yeah,
be smaller.
usually 10 foot, when I first heard of it, that's great. Then when you're parking cars, and you're perpendicular, you certainly got to go off the right-of-way into the other property.
Depending on the right-of-way, yes,
Yeah.
there are certainly some cases, but there's others I know of where, and I'm guilty of driving a short wheelbase vehicle, but,
Well, most of them are certainly
There's-
longer than 10 foot.
yes, that certainly can happen. And so maybe the clear zone can include a carve-out for parking. We're just at the idea stage here. We can write the ordinance.
What would be the problem if you extended the right-of-way to, say, 15 foot?
Well, I think that would make parking even harder.
Why?
Maybe we're
Oh, you
missing
mean, you're
each other.
saying that you said that before. So this right-of-way, you're not supposed to park on.
Well, with our terms, because we're not talking about right-of-way, we're talking about free zones. So let's be careful. The right-of-way downtown is 99 feet.
Okay.
That's
Oh,
immutable.
free zone.
But we're
Okay.
talking about this 10-foot clear free zone from the
Okay.
edge of parking into the right-of-way.
So you'd have to go beyond the freezeway onto the other property to park.
It still would be the right-of-way, but yes. The right-of-way is the full width, essentially.
Okay.
Like if
No,
we're
I
looking right out
understand now.
here.
I didn't understand that. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'd like to say this. I think we do need a very clear right-of-way ordinance. We need to have very clear mandate for enforcement. But we can thank our neighbors in Oak Island for a lesson that we should have learned in the last few weeks, which is we've got a tremendous education of the public task ahead of us before we take any final action. If you've been paying attention over there, people are going crazy because they've got a very different type of right-of-way restriction now. But it is awfully hard for people to get their arms around the concept that they own the property, but they can't use it the way they want to. And that's the same thing here.
Let's be careful, because they don't own it, and you don't own it here either. The right-of-way is a right-of-way, and you do not own it.
Well, look at your surveys, though. Your survey
Right.
will go out to the end of the property, but there will be a delineation of where the right-of-way is.
Your survey only goes to the right-of-way, it doesn't go into the right-of-way. You don't own the right-of-way. There's no survey that shows anybody owning the right-of-way other than the city of Southport.
An easement maybe, but I think in this case, the right-of-way, I mean, mine stops at the other side of my side of the sidewalk. You know, I think we need to clear up the language as it relates
Yeah.
to horizontal plane. I think that's an important part of it. For me, you know, I don't have a problem with people putting in a beautiful driveway or a paver drive or something like that, which I think it happens all over town right now. So if the vertical structures are what we have a problem with, plants, things like that, then let's find out what that looks like. Fence, stones all the way out to the street. Let's find out what that looks like, and let's try to tailor something to fit that. Let's not change what we have, you know, because again, I feel the same way you do. It's very hard to be 10 feet off the street and not encroach so far onto the sidewalk.
So that's all great feedback. I appreciate that. Dory, can you hit the next to the?
Travis, can you
Maybe a
give
couple
us, when we have this discussion again, can you give us some plot maps that shows what goes on now, and then 10 feet, what does that look like? So we're all on the same page as to what that is. So,
Absolutely.
okay.
Any excuse to draw, I'm going to take it. So,
And you-
absolutely.
Are you saying that what you were proposing, that the driveways cannot come out to the pavement?
Oh no, they certainly could.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So, no, it's fine. I'm sure it's my fault. Certain it's my fault. So anyway, you know, when it comes to the recommendations, the clear zone of 10 feet, that was not me pulling a number. That was, you know, there was a bunch of folks who were involved in that, but there certainly may be instances that less of a clear zone is appropriate or all that's required. So I can take this feedback back to that group and get their thoughts on it and see what we can come up with there.
What that would eliminate too, maybe not 10 foot, maybe it's going to be less, is puddles on the road. Because the water will drain now and not have somebody build a mound. And I've said this many times before. It would solve a lot of standing water around town.
And I'm glad you said that because I'm gonna get to that point too. You know, another sort of carve out that we're gonna have to think about is areas where paved parking also exists, because I wrote the clear zone as from the edge of the pavement. But if the pavement already goes all the way to the edge of the right of way, then we're gonna have to think about that. But that's also probably city provided parking anyway. So that's we'll need to look at that from a carve out standpoint. As far as vegetation, ground sort of planted vegetation would essentially be allowable under this recommendation outside of the clear zone. We would provide a mechanism for, and this mechanism sort of already exists, but definitely clean it up, get the forestry committee involved with how, you know, non-city trees become city trees and that sort of thing. And any tree within the clear zone, of course, we're not going to tear down. Most of those trees that are within those areas are quite old and quite valuable, so.
Go ahead.
The whole thing about vegetation and the reason the ordinance is written not to allow it is because if we had some conversation that says you can shrub it up, then my opinion about what I want that portion of the right-of-way that's in front of my house to look like could be radically different than my next door neighbors. It's a streetscape, it's a historic preservation, it's parking. My neighbors, to give you an example, I didn't finish with all my measurements. On my block, there are 12 houses. Of that, only 3 have narrow driveways. So goes my neighbor, so goes me. So if my neighbor decided to shrub up their portion of the right-of-way such that then guests and different people can't utilize it for parking, that's why parking's protected. You know, one thing that it also speaks in use of public right-of-way in the Code of Ordinances, it says residents may not charge production companies for use of right-of-ways in front of their homes, nor prohibits its use for, throughout the ordinances, it recognizes that these are public right-of-ways and for public use, not for the individual use. So I would ask that we stay more true to the ordinance or consider that, because I think, and I appreciate vegetation is beautiful, but it's separate from what the purpose of these right-of-ways, how we're utilizing them.
Robert, did you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with some level of this vegetation. I think that it is nice, you know, to see azaleas planted around an oak tree or something like that. I'm struggling with the idea that the Methodist park in my front yard, you know, I've thought about putting Catholic parking only, but the Methodist park in my front yard. But I think that's an example of, if I planted plants there, that parking would go away. And, you know, we already have a very large issue with parking, especially downtown. Now, as we move back, maybe less of an issue with parking. You know, once you get back a few blocks, that's not the issue. But here in town, here in these, you know, original lots, I struggle with allowing restriction of the parking. I think that's my bigger issue, is restriction of the parking. Because I think that if some of the stuff that was going to happen or may happen in the next few years in the commercial district happens, you know, John's block they'd have plants all the way out to the asphalt, you know, and those people would have to park somewhere else. So I struggle with that. I struggle with the 10 feet because it doesn't make sense. In most places, it doesn't make sense. You know, as someone who lives in this area, Kieran's measurements aren't far off. So I'm struggling with that. You know, because again, if it's 10 feet of clear and then you can have plants there, but that's supposed to be parking too.
There's the last slide I have is remaining items to address, and one of those items is allowing vegetation blocks the right of way. And so how do you allow for vegetation or do you not? And the only reason it was in there to allow for vegetation is because that's the primary encroachment that's been allowed to occur over time, is vegetation. And
Well,
so-
there's also, I put gravel in my front yard, in the right-of-way.
Yes.
It is my parking space, and you may not park there. I've been scolded more than once for pulling up to get out to look at something, and the guy comes running out of the house telling me that I can't park in his front yard, but it's not his front yard.
Wasn't me.
No, it's not. So my question is that there's a lot of work to be done here, but as we build out the commercial area, we need to figure out how we're going to address this parking issue. The parking issue is, right now, I can park my car in front of Robert's house and leave it there, because we don't have any time limits on anything. You know, there's a lot of parking regulations that have to go with this whole thing. We have to look at it kind of as a package. You know, as you go down here, just down the street here, in the summertime, there are hundreds of cars that are parked there for a week at a time because they're getting on boats to go over to Bald Head Island. And we allow them to park 24 hours a day, even though it says 2 hours, because we don't enforce anything. If we enforce that, we would open up summertime parking around here quite a lot. If you just said you can't park down here between the hours of midnight and 5 a.m., and you just wrote everybody a ticket.
Speaking of parking, and it's another discussion, when are we seriously going to discuss making some parking right in town here and close to the center? When are we going to do that?
Well, that's a different conversation.
It's a different, yeah, but it's got, it's avoided.
So I would
And
like to.
this is the basis of what we're saying. We have no parking. So.
Can I talk?
On the other hand, if we start getting everything into the pot, now we have got basically a whale, and we're not going to be able to eat the whale all at once. So the right-of-way is a piece. That's one dish. And then, but we're aware of the whole parking issue. I agree, this will be my fourth time in a meeting like this, fourth year, where I've been talking about using the yacht basin area, that whole open block. There are multiple problems with parking, and it's a many-layered problem. But the right-of-way is not, what we do with the right-of-way is not going to solve it or hinder it one way or the other, I don't think.
Yeah. Let's talk about, I just want to talk about a couple of examples and what would happen if. And so along Bay Street, on the water side, most of those homes, their steps fall off onto the right-of-way. If I went and parked there, what would happen? Now, I'm not asking you to answer that question, but this is a legitimate rhetorical question. At my house, I do have off-street parking. I could pull on through and park on my own property. If someone parked, limiting me access to that off-street parking, what would happen? So these are some serious questions that we have to ask ourselves as we continue to, consider the right-of-way question. And those are two great examples that happen every single day. Come home, there are people, Methodists probably, parked in my driveway, or someone at the 4th of July has parked, and it's not my driveway, but it attaches to a driveway. It's right-of-way, it's limiting access to my property. So those are the issues, I think. How do we, again, consistency. How does everything look the same? Safety. How do we make sure that on Bay Street, you're not jumping over stones and a fence to get out of the way of oncoming traffic? And those are the extremes.
And Bay Street is particularly tough because, I mentioned those setback exemptions. One of those exemptions is that if I'm coming in to build a house, I can match my front setback with what's next to me and what's on the same block. And on that same block, the front setback is effectively zero. The front of those houses is built on the property line. It's safer from a flood perspective to be up that far, but it's all one big system, right? So, all right, I think we can, one of the things I had kind of looked at, and I've heard this from other folks too, so this isn't coming from just nowhere, but Dory, can you go to the next slide, please? So when it comes to what we do allow for parking in the right-of-way, and in terms of folks improving it, I don't think it's too much to ask for that, any sort of improvement to be pervious, as opposed to true impervious coverage. And I'm using that picture particularly because I don't know that gravel is necessarily pervious. It's very fine gravel. It's my assumption, if I went out there while it wasn't the most beautiful day we've had recently, that water would be running right over top of it and into wherever. So if we're going to allow gravel, which I think is reasonable, we already allow gravel in a lot of places. It's got to be a certain type of gravel. Can't just be crush and run, do whatever you want. 57 stone with some geotextile stuff underneath it to keep it in place and keep it pervious. Pavers, as long as it's pervious, absolutely.
And there's pervious pavement, too.
There is, absolutely.
They use it in Indigo. A lot of your driveways in Indigo are pervious pavement.
And so, moving on to kind of really where the rubber meets the road here, so to speak. No pun intended. Seriously. So it's essentially how we've kind of drawn up addressing this is the same way that DOT does, which is through an encroachment permit. So anything that is being proposed would get reviewed by myself or somebody in the planning department, by Tom or somebody in his department, and by the fire marshal. It's making sure that it works from an ordinance standpoint, it works from, we need to know what utilities and things are underneath whatever's going to be put there, and also that it's safe. Included within that would be a required acknowledgement that the city can remove those encroachments if it needs to perform maintenance or something else on any utilities that are underneath those encroachments, and that we are not liable for replacing those encroachments. I'm not an attorney, never claimed to be, but I think that's the case already. But getting them to acknowledge that on the front end would be very helpful. We also, if this were to be drawn up in an effective way, staff would be given the discretion to deny permit applications where there are official projects that are coming. And that's more so to protect the public, to make sure that they're not investing money in something that we're just going to rip out in 6 months. And then, based on the feedback that we just heard, and the acknowledgement that parking in a right-of-way is not exclusive to you. If somebody gets there first, somebody gets there first. That's what happens in a public right-of-way. If you want your own private parking, figure out a way to make it work on your own property. In terms of how this kind of plays out, Dory, if you don't mind, thank you. What we propose is the idea of a grace period, an aggressive PR campaign to provide the education as to where the city's going with this, and we would be asking property owners to remove the encroachments on their own through that 6-month period. In the meantime, staff is already going to begin the process of identifying where these encroachments exist and working with property owners to advise them of what's going on, but we wouldn't actually be taking, we wouldn't be sending notices of violation, we wouldn't be entering the court order compliance process yet. Once that grace period's up, I don't think any longer than 6 months is necessary, we go full proactive enforcement on right-of-ways from here on out.
What's your PR campaign to try to lessen the pitchforks and torches coming out on this whole thing in relationship to your 6 months? So we pass something, if I'm understanding you correctly, 6 months from that point of time is when you would like to start enforcement. Is that enough time for all of do we have a PR campaign? Somebody should be charged with writing that up. So we know how that would overlay on this.
Well, sure. The first thing I would say is that the PR campaign actually starts before we even pass anything. This is I would assume that this would come across the planning board's desk at some point. Multiple presentations to the planning board, multiple presentations to this board. That's just one piece of this.
We don't even televise that. So unless you're sitting in that room, you don't know about it. So that idea that you should have been at the meeting. I'm looking at a real, honest to God, PR process to communicate this whole process.
I think we're putting the cart before the horse. We'll figure out how to do a PR campaign. We don't need to, let's go through the steps and do what we need to do. We'll figure out how to let people.
And we'll bring it to you.
You will be cleaning up some of the language and adding in definition of horizontal planting. We'll be adding in pervious material requirements and so on.
just, I can tell you from the 3 months I've been here, your UDO's definition section will be getting a lot longer in the near future. And so really all that's left is if there's, I've gotten, I mean, the feedback I've gotten has been fantastic, and I thank you all for that. Just overall thoughts on this approach, first off, and then, you know, we've already talked about kind of, you know, the width of the clear zone and how to address outliers, and we'll take that back to our public safety folks and come up with a solution there. City public parking projects, I think, you know, carve-outs for that would be appropriate. Really kind of the big ticket item, we already talked about blocking the rights of way and vegetation too. The big ticket item here is proactive versus reactive enforcement more broadly. This is, you know, the ordinance is at best unclear. When I was hired for this position, my assumption was that Southport was proactive enforcement across the board. Come on, why would you question it? Coming from a county in which 2/3 of the county didn't even have internet coverage and was very rural, it would make sense why we were reactive. But it isn't clear, based on conversations I've had with, you know, current staff, previous staff, that there's ever been a formal direction as to whether we are reactive or proactive. My recommendation is that we should be proactive. And we should especially avoid any scenario in which we're proactive on some things and reactive on others. Of course, that's a lot. If we're going proactive and we were going to do it right, the amount of staff needs that would come from that would increase a fair bit.
I think in my years here, what I've seen, is there were too many people making the decision. Somebody would make a decision, yes, you can do that. I've had interviews, people call me up and I'd say, well, they said, well, this person told me I can do it, even though it shouldn't have been. So there was too many people making that decision and not one person saying, this is the way it's got to be.
Yeah, I mean, if we pass whatever it is you decide to pass, then that's going to be it. And I've seen this in other towns where they'll go, oh, you know, my neighbor, no, can't we just, you know, they want us, no. The answer's going to be no from this city manager. We cannot. So just as, you know, it's a tricky subject. It really, really is. But what's good for one is good for all.
This isn't the only code enforcement that should be proactive. So I don't know what steps staff needs from this board to make sure that all code enforcement is proactive, but I'd like for us to go ahead and do that sooner than later.
So why don't we do it like a rewrite and bring just that part, and let's bring it to them and let's get that going.
Sounds good to me.
But you know, and you'll see in next year's budget, though, there will be a request for another body, because you can't be everywhere, that's for sure. But we've got a lot of issues with code enforcement, you know, in this town. And I know you and Karen have brought them up to me multiple times, you know, and we've got to start addressing them all.
Well, and this, it also goes back to, you know, the state through the courts and now state statute we're on the clock with zoning violations. If we know a zoning violation exists, which in a place like us, it's very hard not to know that something exists, we only have 5 years to take action on it. Otherwise, we lose our ability to, you know, take court action to address zoning violations. And if we can't take somebody to court, if the statute of limitations has run out and the person violating the ordinance knows that, you know, there's not going to be a lot of teeth that we have. So being proactive will avoid any issues with that. It also just gives more legitimacy to everything that Development Services Department, the Planning Board, Board of Adjustment, and the HPC.
Travis, will there be exceptions if somebody asks for a permit to park? I mean, like you say, you need a permit. Say like in Karen's instance, she can't get her car in without encroaching on the 10-foot. Is there an exception? Will there be an exception made for that, so that there is some parking?
We can look at that, but I think what I'm hearing is that the 10-foot clear zone is too wide. So we can look at that, but at some point, they're going to have to park somewhere.
Well, that's what I mean.
So,
It's going to be hard to enforce it, say, well, I got to park 3 blocks away because I can't park in front of my house.
well, and I think in terms of enforcement of just parking generally, that's probably going to be a little bit more difficult than just enforcement of any infrastructure or any sort of, hardened encroachments. But I'll make a note, and we'll take a look at that.
So Travis, you just said you're hearing that the 10 feet's too wide, because I'm actually wondering if it's not wide enough, just to muddy this up some more. I guess the situation I'm trying to think of is, 4th of July, let's say. Right now, the public, anybody has the right to park in the city right-of-way, okay? If we have a 10-foot clear zone immediately adjacent to the pavement, then if it's a clear zone, then nobody should park in it. So if a visitor does want to park, then they'd need to be 10 feet off the pavement. One way to accomplish that would be to have another 10 feet beyond the clear zone where people can parallel park. Of course, enforcing that and telling people about that, I guess, is almost impossible. But I'm just concerned that if we create a 10-foot clear zone, if it's truly a clear zone, then in theory, we're eliminating tremendous amount of right-of-way parking. I'm struggling to figure out how that's gonna look and work exactly.
Maybe you could figure out a minimum and a maximum or something.
Why,
you know.
or we could just accept that it's right of way.
Right away, right.
And the need for a clear zone is not needed. Yeah, there's no need to have a clear zone if you enforce the ordinance. If you accept the ordinance as written, and people are going to park, I mean, frankly, Karen just said, she cannot park outside of that 10-foot clear zone. I can't park outside of that 10-foot clear zone. So it's not going to happen, and certainly not going to happen on the 4th of July.
Are you suggesting that the ordinance just be written, for the lack of a better term, I'll say more strictly, that we're going to take back the full amount of our right-of-way? And, I mean, people got to rip out their azaleas that they have planted in the right-of-way, for example?
We just enforce what's not supposed to be in the right-of-way. Fences and walls and everything, and bushes, so many feet back.
The examples that you showed here, their plants do come out so far that it is difficult to make that turn, right on west-west.
Yep.
So that's a safety issue, especially on a corner lot. And perhaps there's language about corner lots that don't exist with interior. I don't know. But at this point, I don't see the need for the clear zone because it's in most areas, John, you can't park off 10 feet off in your location. There's not enough space there.
Right. So honor the right-of-way.
Talked about the idea of if something currently exists, we notify them of the encroachment. We let them know that. I don't know how to do that because, again, you go to Bay Street and there's so much that's been done there. Asking those people to rip it out would look worse than it does today. And it'd be quite a burden on some of those people. So I don't know what the answer is. If we can say, make them aware of the encroachment, make them aware that it's illegal, and, you know, basically hold the city harm. If someone were to fall over a fence that's planted, that's a city liability.
Absolutely.
Right? So we need something that says we're held harmless for their encroachment.
Nah.
Is there an amount of footage that you're not supposed to have anything off the edge of the road in our regulations? I'm not familiar.
Not currently.
Well, you know, if we say, okay, 20 foot off the road, it's got to be clear, wouldn't that solve the problem?
Do you allow parking within that zone or not? I think
Yes,
that's the
oh,
question.
yeah.
20
You have
feet's
to.
not enough.
There's no other place to park here.
The problem, I think, there is we can't call it a clear zone for safety purposes, because if you have 20 feet and somebody parks perpendicular, they're going to be in the clear zone.
Well, yeah, no, but
Yeah,
you
no.
can park on it off the edge of the road, but you can't have any obstructions, no fences, no bushes, no nothing.
That's probably not much more than the right, or much less than the right-of-way is, as, you know, I keep going back to the examples of Bay Street because it's blatant, the encroachments there. And I don't mean to pick on those people, but how are we going to handle that?
Well-
Because again, the encroachment goes from their steps all the way to the street, all the way to the road. They are basically all the way up to the road. There is no, so what do we do there? What would your recommendation be to handle people that are, how do we handle it?
It's going to be very tough to handle, especially when, to Alderman Lombardi's point, there's probably going to be some of those folks who have documented proof that the city allowed them to do it via permit.
I don't think so.
I-
I think a few. There's
There's at least a few. And so,
What is your recommendation?
ultimately, if we're taking proactive enforcement, any hardened structure that's inside the right-of-way that we don't carve out via other modifications to the ordinance would have to come out. The driveway and parking areas, I think we can work with them on that, but anything that goes up, that's what would have to come out.
And adding the conversation, I think Alderman Carroll had a good point of adding to the ordinance that if you block an existing driveway, then you can be towed. I mean, we need that kind of authority so that in these situations, you know, so that would, I mean, just to clarify it and have people sign, whatever they're doing, sign off on whatever and add that to it. Is there anything else? I mean, you've got a lot right now to take away and come back, because this is just the big first conversation. Does anybody have anything else? Yeah.
Yeah, my recommendation is that we do have some further workshops.
Yeah.
And include citizen participation.
Sure. Yeah, that'll be the next level. And I just want to also support proactive enforcement. And since we're going into the budget process, please let us know what you need in order to make, because you've got land use issue. I mean, it's not just right of way or parking or this or that. It's all of our ordinances, a whole, the UDO and the code of ordinances.
Well, and it's Historic Preservation Commission hasn't gotten its full teeth yet, but once it does, we're going to need somebody essentially living in the historic district. Right.
Then we'll
Just-
plan to come back at your workshop in March with revisions based on what we've heard, along with like some of the beautiful drawings. And then we'll just take this and slowly keep working on it. Meanwhile, just doing these here is PR. And meanwhile, I'll work with Randy and his crew to develop a whole PR campaign we'll bring back to you in March.
Is the code currently written that only the code enforcement officer can enforce this stuff?
To my knowledge, yes.
Yeah, I think so.
Then I would suggest that we look at the possibility of including language that the police can do the same thing. So if the code enforcement officer is not around and it's something that needs to be done, somebody dumps a dumpster in front of their house, but it's in the right of way, blocking something, yada, yada, it makes it clearer that they can enforce that, have it dragged away if they want to.
I have just one more thing, and I noticed that it was also in here talking about, it's timely because of Sewer and Alderman Ott's conversation about the system development fees, that it's eateries with, during COVID, we relaxed things in order to make everybody have the opportunity to have 6 foot apart and all of that. So I just wanted to bring that up for you.
We're on it. We have a list that we have a list that Chris Martin has put together of basically every restaurant that has outdoor seating. In terms of determining who has what power to do what level of outdoor seating, that's part of this conversation, and also, of course, system development fees, determining what they paid originally, what they're at now, and making sure that those numbers stay accurate with each other.
About restaurants and outdoor seating, if the seating is not permanently in place, in other words, can be broken down and taken away at the end of the day, how are we going to look at that? As an encroachment or not? I don't have an answer to that, it's just a question that I think we should think about.
Absolutely.
I'm going to follow up on that, and that is, has it caused a problem? Oh, you're looking at, okay. I'm looking at it as, we allowed people to move out into the sidewalk or other places. Has that caused a problem? Because I know in other parts of the country, they realize that that's good for business. And so they're allowing, in fact, they've blocked in some places, there's a place, Old Town Alexandria, Virginia, they blocked whole streets now. And it's all restaurants all the way out to the middle of downtown busy streets. They've done that because the businesses and the people decided, hey, this works out for us. So I'm not against looking at it for a development fee, but I'm wondering is, are we trying to do away with this outdoor seating, which to me adds to the ambiance of the town?
I would not recommend doing away with it. I think it's great, as long as it's done right. Yes.
During COVID, there was outdoor dining guidelines established.
Kate, you're going to have to go to the mic.
During COVID, we actually had outdoor dining guidelines established, and they were passed out, and the restaurants accommodated and followed the rules. So they were established, so we could broaden that use for them in the street, and that was police department, fire department, code enforcement worked together for that.
Did we defer the system development fees, or what was the answer to that?
There was no
There was no. it was-
It's ignored, because it was,
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll start working on everything, bring it back to you in March.
okay. Next is the agenda, hang on. Next is review of Thursday night's agenda. I guess, does anybody have any questions about the agenda?
I have one quick one. Under consent item number 2, transferring ARPA payment to water sewer, that's not new money, I presume. That's what we were expecting to get all along, right?
That's correct. Yep. Yep. If you-
I have 2 quick questions. The first one is, if somebody can make me smarter on this. I looked under the animal control thing, and it says that if you're looking for at-large dog, the Animal Protective Service Officer shall have the authority to go on and about private property to investigate said complaint. So is there a North Carolina statute that gives them, so there's a carve-out for wildlife enforcers to go for the Carroll Doctrine looking in your car. There's a carve-out for Customs and Border people 100 miles from the border to go and basically do away with the Carroll Doctrine. Is there a code section that says that you can go on the curtilage of the property? Here it says you're looking for a dog that's running wild.
Correct.
You don't see it.
If I don't see it on the property, then I would follow it onto the property in order to gain custody of it.
If that's your intent, then I think this wording needs to be a little more. In other words, if you showed up at the property and you didn't see anything, but you're investigating a thought, can you wander about the person's property, go behind their sheds, do everything else? Do you have the legal authority to go on the curtilage of their property?
I still
do that?
follow the amendments. That's part of the job, is you don't, just like police officers, there's certain part of the training that you know that you don't infringe on someone's,
Well,
like
this
I
almost
can't
gives
walk
you
into
the
their house.
authority to do that. That's so.
It might be taken out of context with the rest of the ordinance. I can find that for you, but
Okay.
in no way does that, what that implies.
Okay, I just don't want you to get into trouble when somebody comes back at us and says, I found you wandering around in the back of my yard, and you gave them the authority to do that, but I don't see where they have the authority to go on the curtilage of their property if you can't see the dog. If you see
I'm allowed by
something-
law to go in a curtilage, yes.
You are, so.
Yes.
Okay. That just makes me smarter
Okay.
on that. The other thing is, this is not yours, the playground part. We're going to give $10,000 to a company to design something.
I might be able to answer because I built them before.
So we're going to give $10,000 to a company to do this. And what I read, I did not see, once again, any timelines, any milestones, anything. So we give them the money, and I'm not talking about the implementation of the program. I'm not even talking about the implementation of getting grant money, but the design part of it, so you can actually ask for grant money, because you got to know what the design is, how much it's going to cost. We don't have any timelines on them to execute this contract.
Right, we can try to put something like that together. When I've worked with Boundless Playgrounds before, I'm not sure they're going to necessarily, they work with the community, they work with the disabled community. They will let those kids or the disabled adults design that thing. So we could give them some kind of calendar, but it's not like a construction project. I think you got to be a little more, what's the word I want to use?
Flexible.
Flexible, yes, flexible.
Well, even there, if we had timelines, some kind of discussion points where we're going to ask you to try to do this within X number of months, to do this conversation with the public, as opposed to a 2.5-year dog park, okay? Where we have no penalties, no timelines, no nothing, and it just drags on forever.
Okay, I can talk to them. I'll have an answer for you by Thursday.
The audit is done, is that correct? And we'll receive that Thursday?
You will receive that. There is one section that is not completed, which is why it says draft, because, again, Melanie's been on vacation, and there's a section on capital that because she's out of the country, whatever information was given to the auditor, it's not jiving. So that's only one little section. Other than that, it is complete, and you will hear from the auditor, yes.
Item 8 on the agenda, resolution in support of extending mayoral term to 4 years. We had a discussion on this in addition to other aspects of our charter, I believe 2 years ago, or was it a year ago at one of our retreats. And it's a larger question than the mayoral term. It is, I believe that we spent more time considering wards. Do we want to do away with the ward system? In other words, our whole charter and the organization of our city government at this point. And I think that I would be more in support of a resolution in support of a study committee, ad hoc study committee, to come up with proposals for changes to our charter for us to consider.
Yeah,
I mean, I know that, again,
I
it's
don't
a whale, but I
yeah.
don't think
I
that
don't
we
di-
can do it piecemeal by
Well, I
simply
think-
extending the mayor's term.
I think that this is an important part of this. Every 2 years, it seems a little ridiculous that, you know, you really get into it. You got a good solid year, maybe a year and, you know, a half, and then you're running again. And so I don't particularly like that. I think this is a good step forward, and I agree with you completely on your points, and I think that we can move forward with that in mind.
And keep in mind that congressmen have to run every 2 years.
Which may or may not be a good thing. I think we should definitely go ahead and get this 4-year mayor term thing done. I think we got way too much we're working on now to start trying to rewrite the charter relative to how the elections are held. We got enough to work on without doing that. I don't see that as a priority.
Let's get that done.
Okay. Anybody else with any other question on anything? Do we want to go through each item, or everybody's reviewed it? Everybody's reviewed it and asked their questions?
Of the city manager, or perhaps the assistant city manager, if y'all could send us a list of dates of upcoming meetings for the next several months, because I'm rapidly losing track with my Yeah, well, I'm more concerned with, we've got workshops, budget workshops, whatever, it's not the Citizens Academy, whatever it's called, and I wanted to ask specifically about that, is the staff's expectation that we all attend all of those? Okay.
No.
We were told to attend one in particular.
Correct.
But I think it was the wrong date. It said to attend the June meeting, but the July meeting is the one for the aldermen, or the other way around. So
We'll
I assume we're
double-check
supposed to
that,
come to the
but-
one for the aldermen.
No, you're
All
more than welcome to come to each one, but no, you don't have to, but definitely, obviously, the Board of Aldermen one. So we'll just double-check the dates.
Said something earlier that we've got another workshop in the end of March or
March.
something.
You have
Yeah.
one, they're always the Friday before your regular meeting.
This work, yeah, okay.
This
Okay,
one-
okay.
This one just happened to, didn't work.
Other, like, special meetings.
Yeah, and the budget
Let
calendar
us
hasn't
know.
been set up yet,
Okay.
so, but I know when everybody's gone unless somebody's changed their minds. So if there are some dates you're not going to be around, let me know.
Is it helpful that I send out the calendar invites for those dates? Yes. So I'll do that, and I'll send an email out with the dates. You're welcome.
On the part about the planning board recommendation for Sunny Point, is that we're just accepting that? We're not voting on what's going to happen with the property, is that correct?
That's up to you.
Yeah, I think we've
Yeah,
discussed it.
It's just it's a memorandum or whatever of saying either we're giving staff authority to move forward with trying to do
Right.
the sale or not move forward.
We're not going to
with
vote
it.
on actually what we're going to do with the property. Is that
Correct. No, not specifically who we're going to sell it to or how much or anything
No,
else.
right, it's just are you or aren't you?
That part I'm okay with, but the other part, there's other information that I just received that, all right.
It won't be a surprise, I'm sure, that a lot of people are likely to come Thursday and call on us to pass a resolution encouraging the county, first of all, to accept the master plan, and particularly the part in the master plan about a pool facility, an indoor pool facility. And I would like to have a resolution included in the agenda, and I'll be happy to just make the resolution as a motion to encourage the county to accept the master plan, which it will do this month, apparently, but that they place construction of an indoor pool in or near Southport on a high priority for their capital improvement list. The process, as I understand it from the Parks and Recreation Director, is the county will first of all approve the master plan, which there's very little doubt that they would do. Then later, in a few months, they will start developing their list of priorities for all of the things called for. And we want to, I think, I hope we're all in agreement, we want to encourage them to put the pool facility very high. And so a resolution in support of that would be very helpful. Other cities and municipalities are doing this in this area. The need is great, particularly for senior citizens. I mean, it is now 35 minutes or more just to get out one way to the pool at the community college. So, I mean, you're carving out 2 to 2.5 hours of your day just to use that pool for an hour. So, in other words, I want to add a resolution to our agenda. It's not on the printed agenda, so it will just come up, and I'll be the one to make it. I'm happy to do so.
Well, we probably ought to ask our clerk to craft something because, so it's not just a motion. It would have to be something crafted. If she has time and the inclination, then we could add it to it for sure.
I just want to make sure it's how we're wording it, only because we're asking the county on this wastewater treatment plant that they're going to work with us to make sure this is going to happen, and I don't want that to, oh, now look what they're looking for. You know what I'm saying?
You wanted $10 million to go over here.
Oh,
So there's only X amount of money. So at this point in time, I love to swim, and I think a pool is great. But at this point in time, if I had to ask the county to put $10 million over here, or $10 million so I can flush my toilet, I think that the toilet's going to win.
Keep in mind that as we were very emphatic today, their fund for that kind of thing is here. And all the sewer treatment funds are here, there's never any.
You can add to the sewer fund, but you can't take away from the sewer fund. A surplus of $10 million to build a pool. Do I build a pool, or do I transfer the $10 million into the sewer fund to help? It's not just us for the sewer. I did not understand clearly what they're doing for all this development they've already approved, but they're not talking about building capacity for that until 80% built out. I have no idea. how
that's
that will
correct.
work. I realize that's a statute that they have to work within, but it's going to be built out quicker than traditionally things have been built out. So there's a lot of pull on money. So where do we do that? And I'm not sure how we do that.
Well, I'll work with Dory on just trying to word it in a way, yeah. Yeah, I just think we just got to be careful.
Words like encourage, support, maybe not support, we don't want to give any money.
Yeah, well, I'll work with her, and then I'll talk with you, Lo, too.
Okay, is that it, everybody?
Ask a quick question. Does anyone need any more information on the city attorney? Because we need a city attorney. So if
good.
anybody needs anything, let me know.
Thank you. Okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank staff. This is awesome. Thank you so much for bringing all this forward. Thank you individually for all your work. And y'all. And so, and I'm grateful, and we're going to, do I hear a motion to adjourn the meeting?
We did order lunch, so it's
Is there a
coming at
second?
noon.
Okay, is there a second? Is there a second? All in favor? Thank you.
I thought for sure you'd go longer, so I said order lunch.